All right, let's talk about the Great War. It's often called the domino effect of history, and for good reason. We're going to see how just one single event in 1914 kicked off this unbelievable global catastrophe, one that literally toppled empires, redrew the world map, and really shaped the entire 20th century.
So that's the big question, right? How could a single assassination possibly ignite a war so massive it would engulf the entire globe? I mean, they even called it the war to end all wars. A bit ironic, as you'll see. To really get it, we need to go back to that one specific moment, the spark that lit the fuse on a continent that was frankly a total powder keg just waiting to blow.
So where does this all start? Well, it's not in some grand palace or a secret meeting of kings. Nope. Our story begins on a pretty normal-looking city street in Sarajevo. And it starts with one single shot. An act of violence that would have consequences nobody, and I mean nobody, could have ever imagined.
And this is the man at the center of it all, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He was the heir to the throne of the massive Austro-Hungarian Empire. When he was assassinated on that summer day in 1914, it set off a chain reaction, a political firestorm that even the most powerful countries in Europe just couldn't stop.
And it happened so fast, it's actually staggering. Just look at this timeline. In June, you have the assassination. A month later, in July, boom, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. And then by August, that whole tangled web of alliances we talked about, it just pulls everyone in. All the major European powers get dragged into the fight. The dominoes just started toppling, and they fell incredibly fast.
Okay, so you're probably wondering, how does a fight between Austria-Hungary and Little Serbia blow up into a world war? Well, the answer isn't really about that one event. It's about this incredibly complicated system of alliances that had been building up for decades. It was like a tripwire system stretched across all of Europe. Basically, Europe was split right down the middle into two huge, armed-to-the-teeth teams. You had the Allied powers on one side and the Central Powers on the other. They were all tied together by these treaties that said, if you get attacked, I've got your back. So this was never going to be just a small two-country conflict. No way. It was a setup for a war on a scale no one had ever seen before.
And we really have to stress this point. This wasn't just a bigger version of old wars. This was a totally new kind of war. We're talking about industrial-scale killing, a level of brutality that absolutely shocked the world and left an entire generation scarred for life.
For a huge chunk of the war, the fighting was defined by this: trench warfare. I mean, just imagine living in these long, narrow, muddy ditches for years. You weren't just fighting the enemy, you were fighting disease, the freezing cold, the mud, and just the sheer mental terror of it all. Progress was measured in inches, not miles. It was a brutal, brutal stalemate.
So what made it so deadly? Well, it was fueled by brand new weapons technology. The machine gun completely changed how infantry battles were fought. Tanks, these new metal beasts, were rolled out to try and, break through those awful trenches. And then there was poison gas, which added a whole new, horrifying dimension to warfare.
So, after 4 incredibly long and devastating years, the war finally came to an end. But here's the thing. While the fighting stopped, the consequences, the aftershocks of this global earthquake, they were just getting started.
Okay, so by late 1918, it's over. The Central Powers are defeated. The guns on the Western Front fall silent. But the war left behind this massive scar of destruction, just unimaginable, all across Europe. And the human cost, wow, it was just staggering. We're talking millions upon millions of lives lost. Soldiers, civilians, it didn't matter. It left this deep wound on an entire generation and literally changed the populations of whole countries forever.
The official end came with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Now, this treaty was supposed to create a lasting peace, right? To make sure this never happened again. The great irony is, it did the exact opposite. It basically planted the seeds for the next, even bigger war.
So why was the treaty such a problem? Well, its terms were incredibly harsh, especially on Germany. It forced them to accept all the blame for the war and pay massive penalties. On top of that, it completely redrew the map of Europe. All this just created a ton of resentment and economic chaos that would just simmer and grow for the next 20 years.
And that quote really nails it. The end of World War I wasn't really an end at all. It's better to think of it like an intermission. A 20-year break before the next act, which, unfortunately,
was an even more devastating war, World War II.
Which really leaves us with this powerful question to think about, doesn't it? When a war ends, when the fighting stops and the papers are signed, is the conflict truly over? It's something to remember, because the echoes of history, the sound of those first dominoes falling, well, you can still feel them shaping our world, even today.